Yomא Perek Aleph Mishnah Vav. Says the Mishnah, Im Hoya Chacham Deirish. This Mishnah discusses the night of Yom Kippur. We mentioned previously that we try and avoid the Kohen Gadol from sleeping on the night of Yom Kippur. As we discussed, that if the Kohen Gadol sees a keri, he has a seminal emission, that would render him Tomei, and he would be unable to do the avodah the whole of the Yom Kippur, because he would have to go to the mikveh the next day, and he would only become tahor the following night, after Yom Kippur, so it would be too late. So therefore, to avoid him seeing a keri, we would make sure that he stays up the whole of the night of Yom Kippur. So what does he do? So the Mishnah explains, if he was a Talmid Chacham, Deirish, he himself would stand and give a drasha. The Bartanura says, B'dvar halacha kol leil Yom Kippurim. He would stand and give a halachic discourse the entire night. V'im lav. But if he wasn't a Talmid Chacham, then Talmidei Chachamim darshin lefonov, then others would give a drasha to him. So the Bartanura explains that if V'im lav means V'im talmidu v'lo chacham, which means, says the Bartanura, sheyedei lahovin v'lishmoya, he's able to understand and to listen dvar halacha. He can understand the drasha, but he's not able to give the drasha. So that's the next level down, as it were. So imlav tamdechom darshan lefonov, they would give the drasha to him. Ve'im rogel likris. The Tiferes Yisrael says that after this halachic discourse, after this drasha in halacha, then once that had finished and there's still some hours left of the night, then im rogel likris, if he was able to read kaira, ve'im lav kaira lefonov. But if he was unable to read, then they would read to him. So what does that mean they couldn't read? So in those days, imagine like a Sefer Torah nowadays, which is unvowelized. So too the Sifrei, Nevi'im and Ksuvim were also going to be unvowelized. It's not like opening a Tanakh. It's like written from a klaf on a scroll. And therefore there were no vowels, so therefore you had to be trained, you had to practice and be able to read. So not all the Kohanim Gedolim could do that. And therefore, if they could, they would read, and if not, they would be read to. Uvamek Kairin Lefonov, what would they read from? What would they read to him? Be'iyov, or Be'ezra, or Be'divrei Hayomim. They would read these Sfarim, Iyov, Ezra, and Divrei Hayomim. Explains the Bartanura, Shehem Dvarim HaMoishchim Es Halev. Because these are matters, these are topics which are Moishech the Lev, which draw his interest and his attention. And therefore they prevent him from sleeping because he's too interested in these Sfarim to fall asleep. Interestingly, the Tiferes Yisrael explains why, what's the unique nature of each of these three Sfarim. First of all, the book of Iyov is educational in as much as that it draws on profound topics which touch on the very purpose of life. And therefore, educationally, that's very important for him. The Sefer of Ezra is read because it has a very important emotional impact on him. Why? Because the Sefer of Ezra has very moving descriptions of the desolation of Yerushalayim, plus the attempts to go back to Yerushalayim to rebuild the city and the Beis Hamikdash, and that would give him, that would inspire him to have a heightened understanding of the importance of the avodah on the following day. And lastly, they would read Divrei Hayomim, which would be some sort of diversion for him, as the Tiferes Yisrael says, because it highlights the important incidents that took place in the first temple period. Continues the Mishnah, Zechariah ben Kavutel Omer. Zechariah ben Kavutel said, Pa'omim haber, many times, Korisi lefonov b'Doniel. I read from Sefer Doniel in front of him. Interestingly, the Shoshanim LeDavid, that the Art Scroll Mishnais quotes, says that the Zechariah ben Kavutel maintains that there is no specific book, no specific sefer from Nevi'im or Ksuvim which had to be read, and it was the personal choice of whoever was reading in front of him to read. There was no specific book, and as proof, he says that I happened to read Doniel to him, and but any sefer could be read, and as proof, if you like, he says that's why the Rambam doesn't mention any specific sefer to read. He just says that if they could read if they want to, but he doesn't mention any specific book. Interestingly, and lastly, the Kahati Mishnais quotes a very interesting pshat from Rav Unterman. I think Rav Unterman was the third Israeli chief rabbi. After Rav Kook and Rav Herzog, I think Rav Untum was the following chief rabbi, and he says a very interesting pshat. Why Dafka Doniel? So clearly, if we're talking about a Kohen Gadol who was so unlearned and so unlettered that he couldn't actually read himself from the Vim and Ksuvim he had to be read to, we're talking about that period, which we've discussed before, in the sort of the later part of Bayis Sheni, where the Kohanim Gedolim bought their way into the job, and they were unlearned and unlettered men. And therefore, they were so unlettered that they didn't even speak Lashon HaKodesh. Their language was Aramaic, and to hint to this, Zechariah ben Avkulus, Zechariah ben Kavutel alluded to this by saying that they dafka read Doniel. Why? Because the first 7 chapters of Doniel are written in Aramaic. So therefore they specifically read material which the Kohen Gadol would be able to understand, because he wasn't familiar with Lashon HaKodesh, he was only familiar with Aramaic. That's the pshat that the Kati brings in the name of Rav Unzman. That is the end of Mishnah Vav.